Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Catherine Lorimer's Guide to Life podcast. How you guys all doing? You okay? All happy? Right, so let's have a little bit of a cheer. Hang on. Right, this is for us, for you for listening to me, because I think you probably deserve another round of applause for that. Woo! Yeah, cheers for that. Thanks very much for listening, guys. And we've made it till September. I am recording the podcast now a week in advance. I'm back to being a little bit more organised. Recording it for the 6th, because it's the 6th. Well, we're getting up the 6th. It's obviously not the 6th because it's in August, but I'm back to being a little bit more organised. So change to the format. I think I mentioned I'm going to be I'm going to be doing a murder cold case, or a couple of murder cold cases, historical ones. Well, one historical, one not so historical, but still historical, but just not quite as old, if that makes sense. On the first Saturday of the month. I've got it all planned out in my diary and everything. I'm quite excited. Then I'm going to have a bit of a discussion. I'm hoping to have a guest. If not, I'll just be chatting with myself or maybe to Pippa, depending on how it goes. Depending on how many of my friends I can actually bribe into coming on and chatting with me about various topics. I reckon Jane will be up for it. Jane, you up for that? I think you will be. I think she will be, yeah. And so then I'm going to be doing a ghost hunt because it's dead exciting. And I've got a couple of venues that I'm going to go and visit over this weekend, actually. So that'll be ready. So hopefully I can record that in advance as well. Ideally, I'm hoping to be able to get a month's podcast recorded in advance because, you know what, recording on a Friday night and then uploading it before you go to bed is a little bit stressful. So I don't want to go down that route again. And then I'm going to be doing something around the lines of something that's like maybe challenge myself this month or push myself out of my comfort zone. So that's this month's plan, or the ongoing plan for the future. So what are we talking about this month? So this month, okay, right, I'm going to be viewing a couple of cold cases. Sorry, I'm gabbling on, talking really quickly. I've had 2 cups of coffee. Can you tell? Okay, sorry about that, folks. I'll rein it in a bit, okay, and just try and speak a little bit slower. Otherwise, the podcast is going to be 15 minutes, not half an hour, which isn't in anybody's interest. So what am I talking about this week? Well, I'm going to talk about, the first case I'm going to talk about is murder at Pinky's, okay? So growing up in Chester, it's a really pretty quiet place, to be honest, and nothing much really happened. So when this happened in 1991, there was a murder, okay, in Pinky's Sauna and Massage Parlour in Bourton. And it was massive for our little town. It was the talk of the town. You know, everybody was like, oh my, I didn't even know there was a massage parlour there, what even that meant, or anything. So it was really quite, wow, it was, massive. Nothing like this ever happened in Chester. There was no violence at all. Nothing like this ever happened in Chester, ever. All that would maybe happen is there would be like a bit of a punch up between blokes on a Friday or Saturday night if they've had too much to drink in the pub. That was about it. So, but astonishingly, as I say, the killer has never been caught. Never been caught. So 1991, that's a fair time ago. Is it 30 plus years? Yeah, something like that. Hang on. 34 years by my dodgy mathematics calculations, and bear in mind that I did actually have to resit my maths GCSE. Yeah, got a D first time. Couldn't get into university with that, so I had to resit it. Got to see the second time though. So, now I don't think we should speculate about sort of live cases because this is a live case technically. But it has been unsolved for 34 years, okay? But then you see, I'm not a qualified detective and no one really wants to probably hear my thoughts on it when I haven't seen the case file. I don't really know, everything. So I'm just kind of going to go through it, just maybe put a different perspective on it, maybe just try and trigger someone's memory. Because at the end of the day, because there might be someone out there that was afraid to come forward at the time, is afraid to come forward to the police, but actually you can speak to Crime Stoppers and you can do it anonymously. Because I think it's important that we do try and find the person who killed Lynn Trenholm, because that was her name. She was a real person. And it doesn't really matter what her occupation was, what she did for a living. She was a real living person. She was someone's daughter. And whoever did this did not have the right to end her life early. Okay, no matter who they are. So let's go through what we know about the case. So the victim was Lynn Trenholm. She was 29, okay. She was blonde, short blonde hair. She looked from photos as if she was quite petite, and she was from Failsworth in Manchester, so she wasn't actually from Chester. Now, her body was found on Sunday, the 9th of June in 1991, around about 10 p.m. by a cleaner who had come to obviously clean up for the night. And she had been stabbed multiple times, but the fatal stab wound was into her back. Now, police were looking at the time for someone called John, and there's a photo fit for John online. You can Google it. The reason they were looking for John is because he'd visited previous massage parlours in Warrington and Crewe in sort of April, May in 1991 and been a bit violent towards the women who'd worked there. Now, he was 6'2", slight, muscular build, had fine, natural, straight blonde hair. He was really good looking with a large hook nose, piercing eyes, smooth skin, no body hair. Now, we don't even know if he's a person of interest. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that he is the person involved. And sometimes what can happen is if, you know, particularly in those times, is if a person of interest was like, oh, the poster, everyone kind of goes, oh, right, okay, that's who they're looking for. And they discount everything. But let's discount him, okay? Let's say it wasn't him, right? I want anybody listening to this in around the Chester area or Manchester area to have a think, you know, was there anybody that at the time started behaving a little bit strangely just after this, you know, kind of event? Was there anybody that you kind of thought, do you know what, I thought he might have been involved, but they'd said that it was some guy called John. He doesn't fit the description of, you know. So let's discount that and let's think, just have a think about it. Now, Lynn had been leading a secret life as a sex worker. They say she was from Foldsworth and her family thought that she was working as a clerk. Now, police weren't really sure, okay, about the motive for this one because a substantial amount of cash was taken at the time. So we don't know if Lynn in particular had been singled out, okay, or it was the money. So Lynn apparently was going to leave Pinky's the next day after she was killed because she'd met her ideal man. Sounds a bit Julia Roberts, which interestingly enough, Pretty Woman did actually come out the year before. Now, she was working as a prostitute and say she was stabbed in the back. Now, a couple of key things. There was a guy wearing a green kind of wax jacket. That's been kind of battered about. Whether or not there's any kind of like justification for that, because I haven't heard the police mention it, but apparently that was in the papers. But hey, not everything you read in the papers is true, so we'll just kind of all keep that in mind, but don't actually take it as a guaranteed. Apparently there was a metallic blue Vauxhall carton parked outside, about $4.50. Again, that could be linked. We don't know. But what we do know is there's a blood-stained fingerprint that could be matched to somebody. So if you think it is somebody, or you always thought it was somebody, they can actually be discounted. So if with the fingerprint. Now, the crime is still unsolved. But as I say, Lynn was someone's daughter and someone's friend. And just because of the nature of the work that she did, it still doesn't give someone the right to end her life prematurely. And she deserves to have her story told, and the killer should be held accountable. And with this in mind, I'm going to have a look at a bit more detail about the case. Right, so I've mentioned Pretty Woman before. It came out the year before. And one thing that occurred to me, because there's actually a list of people's names that Lynn had written out and some money values next to it. Again, that's available on the internet. I'm not going to go through the other people's names because apparently they've come forward. We assume, we don't know. But there's one person there called John at 5 o'clock. And also, say, following on from Pretty Woman, in the USA, a person who is known to prostitutes is called John. So we can assume that John probably isn't his real name. So let's have a bit of a recap on the case, shall we? So the victim, so Lynn Trenholm, 29, now she was single. But her mum said that she'd recently met someone and was planning to give up the job at Pinky's the following day. Now, is this, you know, how do we know this? You know, did the killer know that this was going to be Lynn's last shift at Pinky's? Is that relevant? Is that crucial? Also, did her partner know that she worked there? Did she meet him while working at Pinky's? All sort of questions, you know, that I don't know if they've got the answer or not, but there are things that kind of popped into my head when I was kind of reading through everything and looking at all the information. Of actually, surprisingly for me as well, I've actually even prepared a Word document that I'm using to help this podcast, which isn't like me. So I've done quite a lot of research into this topic before actually recording it. Now, we know that Lynn was stabbed with a knife, and the knife was never recovered, okay, which means that the killer had the thought to remove the knife. He also obviously intended to kill her because he removed the knife. And usually anybody that knows anything about, kind of like knife injuries, because we've seen quite a lot of it in the media recently. If she was stabbed, she was stabbed multiple times, but the last one, if he'd left the knife in, she might have actually been saved. But it's actually the withdrawing of the knife that caused that's the reason why she died. Now, one thing that kind of like struck me as a little bit strange is that Lynn had been working at Pinky's a secret from her family because she told them she was a clerk, okay? But wouldn't any partner think it was a bit strange she was working as a clerk on a Sunday, given very little else was open on a Sunday in those days, if her partner was someone that she'd met in Manchester? So that was a bit kind of, strange. Also, she was going to ask him to marry her, which was a bit unusual. Sorry, marry him, which was a little bit unusual in 1991. It wasn't like now today's world. It's like, yeah, that's okay. It's, it's like more common, but in those days it wasn't as common. So that would, I don't know, indicate that maybe he was quite a quiet, shy, sort of timid type person. I don't know, but anyway, just putting that out there. So, crime scene. Well, it took place in Bourton, which is a fairly busy suburb, okay, and it's on the outskirts of Chester. And there used to be loads of places to park around about that, or there used to be sort of like a mini retail area, or as I say, there was allegedly a car parked outside. We don't know if that's relevant or not, but also it is just a short walk. It's probably about a 10-minute walk to the train station. So it was a pretty accessible place. Lynn was working alone in the massage parlour that evening. Now, was this a factor in the murder? Did whoever killed her know that she was going to be working alone that day? There would just be her. Was it a common thing? Did it always happen? Because if it did, maybe it was a regular customer that had done this. Maybe they'd found out. I'm speculating here. I probably need to stop that, don't I? But, just kind of thinking along those sort of lines that it wasn't necessarily the person, the police were kind of a person of interest. We don't know that for sure. It could have been anybody because they haven't caught them yet. Now, shops were not open on a Sunday until 1994. So it would be relatively kind of like quiet on the streets that day. Now, pubs closed for a break, between about 2 and 7 p.m. in those days as well. Last entry on the notepad that Lynn kept a record of was John 5 p.m. So it would be in between the pub opening and closing times. So was someone planning on going to the pub afterwards? So maybe. So I was just say, does anyone remember having anyone in the local area? Maybe somebody turned up a bit late, possibly because they'd had to go and get changed out of their blood-stained clothing, or having a lot of cash on the night in a pub after the murder that night. Now, Lynn was stabbed multiple times, okay, but the fatal stab wound, as I say, was to her back. And that's actually quite difficult because I actually had to Google it because I know that there's 2 big shoulder bones at the back there. So, it's actually, either it was, well, I don't know. It was obviously, you'd have to kind of know where to stab someone, but then again, was it just a random and a lucky because she had been stabbed multiple times? I don't know, but just that kind of occurred to me when I was having a look at the case. Now, if it was robbery, if the perpetrator had thought to bring a knife, because we don't know if it was Lynn's knife, the police just, assume that it might have been, but we don't know because it was never found, then surely they would have also worn a balaclava, okay? And then why need to kill Lynn? Because, she wouldn't have recognised them. They'd been a little bit more organised. And let's face it, armed robbers aren't really known for their meek and mild personalities. So surely there would have been more threatening and more shouting because there was a witness who didn't hear any of that. So, you can kind of probably discount that sort of theory, which means that maybe either Lynn was the target or it was a random chance theft. Or maybe she caught someone. I don't know, but there's loads of things that it could be. But as I say, it's best not to speculate too much. A knife was missing from Lynn's house, as I say, so it is more likely that she brought the knife with her to work. She got it out for some reason. Obviously, she maybe felt that she was being threatened or realised there was an issue with this person, which suggests maybe that she hadn't seen him before and didn't know him. Or maybe it suggests that she did know him and he was a regular and that's why she took the knife. So, there's various different things. Or it could be on account of the cash. They wanted to take the cash, so she got the knife out. But, thinking that through logically, okay, it's your last day, you're working as a prostitute, you don't really have any loyalty to your employer, okay? Wouldn't you just say, actually, mate, just take the cash? Stands to reason that you might do. So is it possible, that they took the money, she discovered him taking the money? I don't know. Or maybe he got... So, it doesn't quite fit, okay, with me, in my mind, in my, quite intelligent brain, that it doesn't quite fit. Although I don't get things right all the time, obviously. And I don't always necessarily see patterns in things instantly. Sometimes it takes quite a bit of me thinking about it to actually see things. Now, it sounds as if more likely that she got the knife out for some reason. Again, I've just highlighted, why would she protect the money if she was leaving her employer the next day? Or in fact, why at all? Why just sort of go, right, okay, no, mate, I'm not going to, it's not my money, therefore, or maybe, therefore I'm not going to let you sort of there's no point getting harmed just because of, money being taken. I don't know. So it's just, I'm not sure, but it's likely that she got it out for some reason. If she brought the knife, they struggled and the killer got the knife off her and stabbed her. So the killer is likely to have been covered in blood, whichever way it is, whether it was her knife or their knife. If it was their knife, then you kind of think that it was maybe premeditated because there'd be a bit of thinking about it. So do you remember him covered in blood? Did you see anybody? Is there anybody that had to go home and wash and get a change of clothes? Maybe you saw them earlier on the day, they were wearing an outfit, and then later on they came back to the pub and they were wearing a completely different outfit. Now, the murder weapon. So it was a long-bladed knife, and I say a knife was found to be missing from Lynn's house, so she could have taken the knife to work with her, which would actually, it'd be interesting to know whether or not she usually did that, or is it just that she felt like she needed to on this occasion? It may well have been because they'd heard about the person called John being a little bit violent and threatening at previous massage parlours. But we don't know his name is John, we're just assuming that it might be, but he is a John, isn't he? Because let's face it, that's a John. So it could have been that she just thought, you know what, I'm going to take a knife to work with me just to protect myself in case he turns up. Right, motives. What was the motive for the case? Again, large sum of money was taken, or was Lynn the target and the theft was just opportune? It's difficult to say. You have to keep an open mind. Witnesses. Now, there was one witness, okay, who heard a thud and then footsteps. Right, did he hear the door shut? Okay. That would be, I would quite like to know. Did he hear the door slam behind? And the reason is this, because if it had been an armed robbery, then he would have heard shouting and screaming from Lynn or some kind of kerfuffle and noise, surely. But as he didn't, he just heard a thud, okay. But also, if there had been a struggle, there's signs of a struggle, wouldn't he have heard more noises, which I find a little bit bizarre? So you're kind of thinking, well, was it staged? I don't know, that's a possibility. And as I say, he just heard a thud and then footsteps. So that doesn't actually give the person concerned, okay, much opportunity to find the cash, which means that he had to have had hold of the cash before the struggle with Lynn, okay, then she died and then he ran down the steps. Or alternatively, somebody else took the money if the door hadn't shut properly, okay, at a later time, because you've got a big window between her last customer, 5 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. That's 5 hours. So just putting it out there, things aren't always exactly as they appear to be. So this case is still open, okay, and you can contact the Chester Police about it if you do have any further information. There may have, even if it's a small thing, because at the end of the day, there's a fingerprint. So if it's not the person you suspect, then they'll be discounted. But at least you can kind of turn it off your conscience and think, do you know what? I've always suspected that person might have been involved. They're not in my life any longer. Let's actually phone up and just say, because you've got Crime Stoppers, it's 0800 555 111. Right? Did you get that? 0800 555 111. If you do have any further information about this case. Now, no other murders have been linked to it. However, interestingly enough, when I was doing a little bit of research, Melanie Hall disappeared, after leaving a nightclub in Bath. So slightly different circumstances. But interestingly enough, she went missing on the same day, Sunday the 9th of June in 1996. So 5 years on. Now, she did look very similar to Lynn. She had a really similar facial shape. She had short blonde hair as well. She was a similar age, 25, and she also worked as a clerk in a hospital, which was, Lynn used to previously work at a clerk for the massage parlours, which, so there's a little bit of a crossover there. So I'm going to have a look into that, what we know about that case next month. Okay, so next part of this week's podcast is a tale of a historical murder which occurred in a small village called Moscow. Yes, you heard that correctly. Not the capital of Russia, but there is in fact a small village near Kilmarnock in East Ayrshire, Scotland called Moscow. Now, why have I picked this murder? Well, I actually used to live very, very close to this particular location. And I used to hack the pony past this house all of the time. And there's actually a little blue plaque on the house. It's called Vulgar House. I think that's how you pronounce it. Vulgar Bank House even. And mainly because there's actually a Vulgar River that kind of runs around through the whole area. So the murder took place on the 4th of March, 1884. Ooh. Now, we're not going to get any, we're not going to be able to find out who kind of did this one. I think that's maybe a little bit beyond our limits, but just because it was particularly interesting. So, because it was like a really, really tiny village. It still is a really tiny village, and you ever get to go, it's just outside Kilmarnock, on the road to sort of Galston. You can't miss it. It's the main road, go through it. And the victim was 60-year-old Robert Rankin, and he was an eccentric who lived alone. And he was found dead, in a pool of blood with a wound to his head and a hammer in his hand, assuming he hadn't hit himself in the head with the hammer, at his home at Vulgar Bank House. So the only information that they knew at the time was that he had been seen drinking whiskey at the local coaching inn with a guest, but no one really knew who it was or who the guest was, and there's no description of the guest either. So this murder is also still unsolved, but the message that I kind of really, really wanted to point out there is that I wouldn't really want somebody to be recording whatever. I doubt it'll be a podcast in whatever 220, 30, whatever 3084, whatever year it might be, of the murder of Lynn Trenholm still being unsolved. So if you do know anything or you do suspect anything, or if there's anybody that maybe behaves a little bit differently, probably I would say on the week before the 9th of June, if they start behaving a bit oddly, not themselves, up until that date, and then they're okay after the date. And you've always kind of thought, well, I'm not really sure where they were on that date, and they had a lot of money, or there were maybe alarm bells that kind of rang, but you thought, no, it couldn't possibly be them. Well, I say there is a fingerprint, so they can be discounted. So I would urge you to come forward and speak to somebody. And again, Crime Stoppers number is 0800 555 111. 0800 555 111. Can leave an anonymous, voicemail. You don't even have to say who you are if you don't want to. Okay, so hope you've enjoyed the New Style podcast. And do you know what? It would be fun. My aim for this whole thing would be even if we just get one case solved, just purely because people have listened to the podcast and thought, you know what, I'm going to phone up. All right then. Okay then. Well, take care, and I'll catch you next time.